What if one evening could change everything? What if a man the world overlooked stepped into a room built for kings and queens and left everyone wondering how they'd missed the strength, grace, and quiet nobility he carried all along? This isn't a story about wealth. It's a story about worth. Aaron Blake had never walked on red carpet before, not unless you counted the faded runner in his apartment building that hadn't been cleaned in a decade. Now, under the glittering chandeliers of the Halcyon Grand Hotel, every step he took felt like it echoed against judgment. He paused near the entrance, heart racing under the weight of his second-hand jacket. It was neatly ironed but older than his daughter. His shoes were polished until they shone, though one had a faint scuff no amount of scrubbing could erase. Still, he stood tall. He hadn't come here for them. He'd come for her. The golden invitation had arrived in the mail 2 weeks ago, tucked inside a cream envelope thicker than the resumes he'd once handed out door to door. At first, he thought it was a prank. Wide with the Langford Foundation, the nation's most elite education trust, invite a single dad who changed tires and brake pads for a living. But the name was unmistakable. Mr. Aaron Blake, guest of honor, father of Hope, Blake Langford scholar. Even now, the memory of Hope's eyes when she handed it to him still brought a sting to his throat. They want to meet the man who raised the girl that won top national merit, she whispered, barely hiding her pride. That's you, Dad. Now, standing on marble tiles, watching couples in diamonds and designer suits glide across the ballroom, Aaron didn't feel like a guest of honor. He felt like a misplaced puzzle piece one everyone noticed didn't belong. A laugh cut through the air near the coat check. Did someone bring their chauffeur in for dinner? A man whispered too loudly. Aaron straightened his spine, keeping his gaze forward. He'd spent years learning to let remarks slide. Whether it was a condescending parent at school pickup or a customer who assumed he didn't finish high school, he knew who he was. More importantly, Hope did. Still, it hurt. He walked past silver trays of canapes he couldn't pronounce, nodding politely as servers offered champagne flutes. He took a glass of sparkling water instead and made his way toward the back of the grand ballroom, where his assigned seat awaited table 19. Tucked near the wall beneath a dim sconce, the name card read, Mr. Aaron Blake. As he sat, the other guests barely acknowledged him. A woman with immaculately curled hair gave him a once-over and offered a tight smile. You must be one of the Foundation's outreach invitees. He nodded politely. My daughter hopes she's a Langford scholar, top of her class. The woman blinked once. Oh, how lovely. Her tone made it clear. Charity case. Next. To her, a man in a navy velvet jacket was scrolling through his phone. They're really opening these events to anyone these days, he mumbled, not even looking up. Aaron didn't reply. He'd learned silence sometimes speaks louder than defense. A low voice from across the table broke the tension. She must be extraordinary, an older man said, setting down his drink. Hope, was it? Aaron looked up. The man's eyes were kind, rimmed with wrinkles that suggested wisdom, not wealth. Yes, she's the kind of person I wish I could have been at her age. He smiled softly. Then you've done something right. Aaron blinked. The man raised his glass in a quiet salute and turned away. It was a small gesture, but it grounded Aaron, reminding him this night wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about showing up for his daughter. The gala officially began with a violin solo, followed by a welcome speech from the Langford Foundation president. As forks clinked against plates of food Aaron couldn't name, whispers circulated the room. Is she really coming tonight? I heard she donated $5 million just last month. Evelyn Langford never shows up to these events. Aaron sipped his water, uninterested until the double doors swung open and the room fell into an unnatural hush. She entered like she wasn't used to silence. Only command. Evelyn Langford, the billionaire heiress, philanthropist CEO, untouchable. She wore a midnight blue dress that shimmered like starlight and walked with the quiet power of someone who'd inherited a kingdom and built it tenfold. Her presence turned heads, but her gaze was focused, scanning the crowd as if searching for something. Or someone. Aaron didn't expect her to glance his way. Why would she? But she did. For just a second, Evelyn Langford's eyes locked onto his, curious and unblinking. Not in pity, not in judgment. In interest. Aaron looked away. Dinner passed slowly. The charity auction began, filled with luxury items, private yacht trips, Parisian fashion experiences, custom artwork. Numbers were thrown around like candy. $60,000 for a single dinner, Aaron thought. You could feed an entire school district. Then came the final auction items, something different. An experience, they said. Dinner with Evelyn Langford, one-on-one, location of your choice. All proceeds to the Langford Youth Futures Fund. The crowd gasped. Even Aaron raised his eyebrows. This was unusual. The bidding started at $10,000. Almost instantly, the numbers soared. $15,000, $25,000, $50 zero, $75,000, $90,000. Aaron watched, detached. This was a world he didn't belong to, but for some reason, he couldn't look away. Then something strange happened. Evelyn raised her hand, stopping the auctioneer mid-sentence. Actually, she said, her voice carrying across the ballroom, I'd like to revise this item. The room froze. I will still honor the dinner, she said, but only if Mr. Aaron Blake accepts. Every head turned. Aaron froze. A ripple of stunned gasps rolled through the crowd. Several people whispered. Some laughed in disbelief. The velvet jacket man at Aaron's table choked on his wine. The woman beside him dropped her fork. Aaron looked up, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Evelyn Langford was smiling, eyes fixed on him. Mr. Blake, she said warmly, would you do me the honor? The whispers grew louder. Was it a joke? Was it planned? Was he dreaming? But Evelyn didn't waver. And Aaron had a choice to make. The ballroom was too quiet. Aaron felt like every sound he made echoed against polished marble and whispered through $1,000 tuxedos. All eyes were on him, but none more direct, more unwavering than hers. Evelyn Langford stood like a woman, completely certain of her decision. Her posture didn't waver, and her smile wasn't the polite, rehearsed one of someone trying to prove a point. It was genuine, patient, as though she wasn't asking a favor, she was inviting a conversation. Aaron's first instinct was to look behind him, thinking maybe she meant someone else. Maybe a different man in a better suit, someone who didn't have grease stains beneath his fingernails or shoes he'd resold himself. But no, she meant him. He could feel the tension in the room coil tighter with every passing second. At his table, the man in the velvet jacket muttered under his breath, "This must be some kind of publicity stunt." The woman in green was already typing something on her phone. A photo of Aaron, no doubt, would hit social media before dessert. But Aaron didn't hear them. All he could think about was his daughter. What would Hope want him to do? She would tell him to be brave, to take up space, even when the room tried to shrink him. Aaron pushed back his chair. He stood. He wasn't sure where the confidence came from. Maybe it was years of swallowing pride just to survive. Maybe it was the memory of every late-night shift, every scraped knuckle, every bedtime story he'd read, even when his hands ached and his mind was exhausted. He straightened his jacket, walked slowly through the aisle of stunned faces, and approached the front of the room. Evelyn waited. When he reached her, she extended her hand. Aaron hesitated only a second before placing his palm in hers. Her grip was warm, steady. "Thank you," she said quietly, so only he could hear. He blinked. "I think I'm the one supposed to be saying that." "I disagree." The auctioneer, still frozen at his podium, let out a nervous laugh and cleared his throat. "Well then, ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a winner, or two." A polite ripple of applause moved through the crowd, more confused than congratulatory. Some people clapped because they thought they should. Others whispered as Evelyn led Aaron back to the head tabler, space reserved for VIPs, Foundation board members, and now a mechanic from Eastridge. She gestured for him to sit beside her, ignoring the scandalized glances of the other guests. He sat. There was a long moment of silence between them. Not awkward, but filled with a hum of questions neither of them asked aloud. "Do you always turn charity auctions into moments like this?" he finally said, trying to make light of it. She smiled again, and this time, there was something a little mischievous behind it. "No, this was the first time." He looked at her sideways. "Why me?" Evelyn took a sip from her glass before answering. "When you walked in tonight, you looked at this room like you were breaking into a world that didn't belong to you. But the way you held your daughter in your words, the way you walked anyway." She shrugged lightly. "I've spent a lot of time in rooms full of people who pretend to matter. It's rare to find someone who actually does." Aaron didn't know what to say to that. "I don't belong here," he admitted. "Neither do most of them," she replied without missing a beat. "They just hide it better." He laughed quiet, unguarded. It was the first time he'd laughed that night. The rest of the evening passed in flashes: more speeches, a music performance, dessert trays that looked like sculptures. But Aaron wasn't watching the stage anymore. He was listening to Evelyn tell stories about the early days of her foundation, how she'd lost people too, how she'd grown up on nothing and built everything, how, once upon a time, she'd shown up to a Harvard donor event in shoes that didn't match because they were the only ones that fit after years of hand-me-downs. She wasn't what he expected, not at all. When the gala ended, Evelyn turned to him once more. "Do you mind if we take a walk?" They exited through the side balcony, overlooking the city's skyline. The air was crisp and clear, and below them, the lights of the city blinked like stars that had come down to listen. "You handled tonight with more grace than I think I would have," she said, watching the traffic below. "I've had practice," he said. "You learn to shrink in rooms that don't want to make space for you." Her eyes turned toward him, serious now. "You didn't shrink." Aaron met her gaze. "No, not tonight." She smiled against something softer this time. "I don't usually get nervous around people," she said, almost like a confession. "But I was nervous." She nodded. "I knew the moment I stopped that auction, I'd start a storm, but I didn't care. Not if it meant someone like you got seen." He was quiet for a long moment. "Why does it matter to you if someone like me is seen?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Because I know what it's like to be invisible." They stood in silence, watching the wind carry distant laughter from inside. The gala was ending. Valets were pulling cars to the front. Lights were dimming. "Should go," he said. She turned to face him. "Dinner, remember, you still owe me." He smiled at that. "Are you serious?" "Completely. I don't know any fancy places." "Good," she said. "I'm tired of fancy." He hesitated, then nodded. "There's a diner a few blocks from my apartment. Greasy eggs, wobbly booths, but they serve the best apple pie I've ever had." Her eyes lit up. "Perfect." That night, the richest woman in the room didn't leave in a limo. She left walking next to a man in a borrowed jacket toward a place with sticky menus and real conversation. And for the first time in a long time, Aaron felt like the room hadn't shrunk around him. It had finally made room for someone like him. Rain fell in a soft mist as they walked. Not enough to soak their clothes, just enough to make the city lights blur like watercolor. Aaron offered Evelyn his jacket out of instinct. She declined, then accepted it with a smile when he insisted. She was quiet for most of the walk, not awkward, just observant, watching him like she was trying to memorize something invisible. Diner appeared at the end of the block like a little pocket of warmth carved out of the cold. Neon letters flickered over the windows, spelling Marty's, half the bulbs burnt out, the others buzzing stubbornly in the damp night. Aaron pushed open the door for her, and a little bell jingled overhead. The place smelled like syrup, strong coffee, and old memories. The waitress behind the counter glanced up from her crossword puzzle and smiled. "Hey, Aaron, you're late for your usual." "Got held up," he said, glancing toward Evelyn. "Mind if we grab a booth?" "Sit wherever you like, sweetheart," she said, eyeing Evelyn with the curiosity of someone filing away a story for later. They slid into the corner booth. The red vinyl cracked along the edges, the table slightly sticky no matter how many times it got wiped down. Evelyn didn't seem to mind. In fact, she looked strangely comfortable, like she'd been there before in some other life. "You're a regular," she said, amused. "I come here when Hope's at her mum's. Don't like cooking for one." "With her mum tonight," he nodded. "Weekend rotation." There was something unspoken in the air between them now. A quiet understanding. The waitress brought menus and 2 mugs of coffee. Aaron didn't even glance at his 2 slices of the apple pie, he said. "Warm, with vanilla." Evelyn smiled. "Bold move. Ordering for both of us. I don't take pie lightly." She laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that turned heads even in a quiet place like this. Not because it was loud, but because it was rare, like sunlight in winter. "So," she said, leaning forward, "what were you really thinking when I bid on that dinner tonight?" He took a sip of coffee. "Honestly, please. I thought someone was playing a joke. Then, I figured you were bored." "Bored? Rich people sometimes do odd things when they're bored." She didn't seem offended. In fact, she looked like she respected the honesty. "What if I told you it wasn't boredom? Then I'd ask what it really was." The pie arrived, warm and perfect, the crust golden, the filling steaming. Aaron pushed 1 slice toward her. Evelyn picked up her fork. "It was instinct," she said after a moment. I've spent years watching men in tuxedos try to impress me. None of them made me feel anything. Then I saw you at that table, sitting so still, like you were apologizing just for being there, and I thought, why? Why should a man like that feel small in a room like this? He looked at her carefully, trying to gauge if this was a performance, if there was a camera tucked in the folds of her coat, or if she was rehearsing lines for some charitable documentary. But no, there was something real in her face, something weary, but kind, something unguarded. I felt like I was letting hope down just by showing up, he admitted quietly, like I was dragging mud across marble floors. She's proud of you, Evelyn said. You could see it in her eyes. She's all I've got, and I've messed up more times than I can count. Have you ever left her behind? Never. Then, you haven't messed up. You've been surviving. There's a difference. He didn't respond right away, just ate a bite of pie and let her words sit there between them. Then he asked the question that had been nagging him all night. Why me, Evelyn? Why not just let me fade into the background like everyone else wanted me to? She put her fork down gently and folded her hands on the table. Because I remember exactly what it feels like to be background noise in a room full of headlines. And I promised myself when I finally had a voice I'd use it to pull people like me forward. Erin was quiet for a long moment. You think I'm like you? She tilted her head. Aren't you? I fix engines. You run $1 billion foundation, and we both learn to survive without asking permission, she said softly. That's more than enough. The silence after that wasn't uncomfortably, it was meaningful. They finished their pie. The waitress brought the check and winked at Erin, mouthing, "Who is she?" As she walked past, he gave a small shrug, half amused, half unsure. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streets were slick and glimmering under the traffic lights. Do you need a car back? Erin asked. I had them send the driver home, she said. You trust me to walk you back? She smiled. I think I trust you with more than that. That sentence echoed in his mind long after they'd started walking. They didn't talk much on the way, just walked in silence through a city slowly winding down. Somewhere near the corner of 3rd and Willow, Evelyn stopped and looked up at a mural, painted across a brick wall, bright colors, defiant brushstrokes. Did you know I grew up 5 blocks from here? She asked suddenly. Erin blinked. You're kidding. I walked this street every day to school. Wore shoes 2 sizes too big, so I'd grow into them. My dad worked at the bus depot. My mum cleaned houses. He stared at her, the glossy image of wealth and success peeling back one quiet detail at a time. You've never forgotten it, have you? He asked. Not for a second. That night, they didn't make any promises. There was no kiss, no overly dramatic ending, just 2 people who'd finally found someone that understood the language of hard days and long nights. When she turned to leave, she paused. Erin, yeah, I meant it. You're not invisible to me. Then she was gone, and for the first time in years, Erin didn't feel like a man trying to catch up to a world that had already passed him by. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Erin didn't expect the headlines. He woke up the next morning to the sound of his phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. At first, he thought something had happened. To hope, he scrambled to check her messages, heart pounding. But her text was simple. Dad, you're trending. He blinked. The phone buzzed again, this time from a number he didn't recognize. Then another, and another. His voicemail was full. A few missed calls came from local reporters, a couple from numbers with out-of-state area codes. It didn't make any sense until he finally tapped open his browser, and there it was. Mystery. Man steals spotlight at Whitmore Gala, who is the single father who won the heart of a billionaire. Evelyn Langford's auction surprise, a dinner date that shocked the room, dozens of them. Some had blurry pictures of him at the gala. Others featured side shots from the diner window, taken through glass with too much reflection. Found his name somehow, paired it with Hope Scholarship and the words mechanic and blue-collar hero. He stared at the screen for a long time, not because he was flattered, because he was terrified. Erin had spent most of his life, invisible by design. It had been safer that way, less to explain, less to defend. And now, strangers were talking about him like he was a myth. Worse, they were talking about Hope. He pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt and called her school just to make sure she was okay. She was curious, slightly embarrassed, but mostly fine. Her teacher had intercepted the press calls. Still, Erin couldn't shake the tight feeling in his chest. He tried to go to work. The The garage was quiet at first until a news van parked across the street, and a young reporter hopped out with a camera crew in tow. He didn't even wait. He grabbed his toolbox and walked out the back door. When he got home, there was a note on his doorstep from someone claiming to represent a daytime talk show. Another from a tabloid. One envelope had no return address, just a gold seal and an invitation to a luxury gala in Manhattan. Aaron sat on his couch and rubbed his hands over his face. What had he stepped into? His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Evelyn. Checking in on you. You okay? He stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Not really. They're everywhere. The response came within seconds. Give me 20 minutes. True to her word, Evelyn showed up half an hour later, dressed down in jeans, a hoodie, and sunglasses. She looked more like someone's older sister than the woman who'd caused a media storm with one raised paddle. Aaron opened the door, gesturing her inside before anyone else could snap. Another picture. She sat on the edge of the couch and looked around his small living room. It was clean but worn, filled with the kind of furniture that had been loved more than replaced. They're not going to stop, she said softly. Not unless we tell them something. He paced near the window, agitated. I didn't ask. For this I know, they are dragging Hope into this too. Her name's all over the stories. Evelyn nodded slowly. That's on me. I should have known what would happen. He stopped and looked at her. Why did you come here? She held his gaze, steady and clear. Because I didn't want you to feel like you were standing in this storm alone. That silenced him, not because he didn't believe her, but because it had been so long since someone had willingly stepped into his chaos, instead of walking away from it. She stood and walked to the kitchen, grabbing 2 mugs and pouring coffee from the pot on the counter like she'd been there a dozen times before. You want me to help you disappear again? She asked. He hesitated. Part of me does, but the other part doesn't want to be ashamed anymore. That was the truth, raw and painful. Evelyn nodded. Then, let's do this differently, on your terms. He frowned. What does that mean? I want to tell the real story, not the fairy tale, not the clickbait, just ... truth. 2 people who met in a room they didn't expect to find each other in. No filters, no spins. They won't print that. Then we won't let them write it. We'll tell it ourselves. Aaron leaned against the wall, arms crossed, heart thudding like a hammer. You want me to stand in front of cameras? No, she said gently. I want you to stand beside me. For you, for Hope, for the people who never get seen. He let the silence sit, let the meaning settle in, and then he nodded. I'll do it, he said, but not for them, for Hope. Evelyn smiled, not triumphant, but proud. For Hope, she echoed. What followed was unexpected, exhausting, and deeply human. They recorded a single video together, just sitting on the worn couch, talking. Evelyn didn't wear makeup. Aaron didn't wear a suit. They just told their story. The truth about the night of the gala. Why she stopped the auction. What she saw in him. They posted it online. That exploded, but not in the way tabloids hoped. There were no scandals, no gossip. Just millions of people watching 2 souls connect over shared strength and quiet dignity. People cried. People wrote in. Mechanics, single parents, teachers, nurses, survivors of silence. People who had spent their whole lives thinking they didn't belong in the spotlight. And for the first time in his life, Aaron wasn't just seen. He was understood. 3 weeks later, Aaron stood on the edge of a world he still didn't feel part of. He wasn't in a mechanic's garage or his living room. He wasn't wearing jeans or the suit he borrowed for the gala. Instead, he wore a tailored navy jacket Evelyn had insisted on not expensive. Just well fitted on stood backstage at a charity summit filled with the country's most powerful philanthropists. Beyond the curtain, cameras flashed. Not for him, not yet, but soon. The event organizer handed him a microphone. 3 minutes, just speak from the heart. That's what people want. Easy for her to say. She hadn't spent the last decade keeping her heart guarded, like a secret. Aaron looked down at the mic in his hands like it might burn him. From across the room, Evelyn caught his eye. She was standing beside a senator, a venture capitalist, and the CEO of some media conglomerate, but her gaze never left his. She gave him the smallest nod. You don't have to prove anything, it said, but also you can. He breathed in deep, closed his eyes for half a second, thought of Hope, of the night she asked him to go to the gala, of the way she beamed when he showed her the first article with his name in it. She didn't care about fame. She just wanted the world to see him the way she did. When he walked on stage, the lights hit hard. The crowd quieted not out of rudeness, but curiosity. They didn't know what to expect. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't polished. He wasn't part of their world. But somehow, his story had brought them here. "I'm not here to impress anyone," Aaron began, voice steady, low. "I don't have a TED Talk or a masterclass. I've got calluses. I've got bills. I've got a daughter who once asked me if I felt proud walking into a room full of people richer than me, and I couldn't lie to her." He paused. The room leaned in. I told her no. I felt small. I felt out of place. And that night, I thought maybe she deserved better than me, someone who wore cufflinks instead of steel-toe boots. But what I didn't know was that pride isn't about how much you make, it's about how much you give. A few people sat up straighter. "My daughter gets straight A's. She reads at a high school level. She makes art from old receipts and builds forts like she's planning architectural wonders. And every single day, I show up. I pack her lunch. I listen when she's scared. I say sorry when I'm wrong. I work until my hands hurt and my back aches, and I do it again the next day because I love her. That's the job." He looked out at rows of tuxedos and gowns, softened faces and wide eyes. I didn't expect anyone to notice that. Least of all the women who did. He glanced briefly at Evelyn. But maybe that's the point. Sometimes love shows up where you least expect it. Sometimes people don't need saving. They just need someone to look at them and say, "I see you. You matter. You belong." Silence. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then the whole room. He stepped off the stage, heart hammering, unsure what had just happened. Evelyn met him in the wings. She didn't say anything. She just took his hand. Later that night, after the event, they slipped out through a side exit and walked through a quiet alley behind the hotel. The air was warm, the sky clear. The noise of the crowd faded with each step. "That was incredible," she whispered. "I was shaking the whole time. Didn't look like it. I faked it. I could tell," she teased. "But it made it better." They reached her car. The driver wasn't there yet, and neither of them minded. Evelyn leaned against the hood, eyes on the stars. "You know what's funny? When I was a little girl, I used to think love was something big, like lightning or fireworks, something that changes everything in one dramatic second." He nodded. "Yeah, I used to think it was something I'd never feel again." She turned to him, her voice gentler now. "But maybe love is quieter than that. Maybe it's someone handing you a jacket when it rains. Maybe it's pie in a booth at midnight. Maybe it's someone who doesn't look away when things get hard." He looked at her, and this time, he didn't look away. That is, he stepped closer, his voice low. "You said you trusted me with more than a walk home." "I did." He took her hand. "And I'm still here," he said. She smiled. "I know. That night wasn't about magic. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was just real. Too. People finding something steady in a world built to shift. But while the two of them were finding peace in quiet places, the world outside wasn't done yet. Some people applauded Aaron's rise. Others questioned it. Whispers turned into voices, and some of Evelyn's world began to push back. Not everyone wanted a story that didn't fit the script, especially not when it threatened the illusion they'd worked so hard to build. The first blow didn't come from strangers. It came from someone Evelyn once called a friend. It was the morning after the summit. Speech after Aaron's words had rippled through social media, racking up views, being quoted by morning anchors, shared by single parents, and reposted by influencers with captions like "Real love still exists." But not everyone was inspired. Evelyn sat across from her family's attorney at a long oak conference table, while her uncle, Charles Langford, sat at the head, his fingers steepled, his eyes cold. The windows behind him cast long lines of sun across the room, making the tension even sharper. "He's a good man," Evelyn said calmly. Charles's nostrils flared. "He's a liability. He's a father, a decent one. He's a mechanic." She didn't blink. "And I'm a billionaire's daughter who couldn't cook a frozen pizza until I was 23. What's your point?" Charles leaned forward, voice like ice. "My point is this family built an empire, and we don't risk it on love stories." She looked at him, eyes steady. "Maybe that's why none of you know what love actually feels like." He shoved a folder across the table. Inside, photos, screenshots, a few anonymous quotes. Fabricated or distorted, it didn't matter. The implication was clear. A smear campaign. Anonymous blogs were beginning to circulate lies about errands, past about fights he never had, debts he didn't owe, things twisted just enough to plant doubt. Evelyn stared down at the folder. This isn't just cruel, it's cowardly. Charles didn't flinch. It's business. No, it's fear. You're afraid of what he represents, someone who's not afraid to be honest. Charles shook his head. He's not one of us, Evelyn. He doesn't understand the pressure, the politics. He'll break under it. She closed the folder and stood up. Then let him break with me. At least that would be real. She walked out, her pulse pounding. But she didn't tell Aaron. Not yet. She didn't want him to feel like he had to defend himself again. Not after everything he'd already survived. Meanwhile, Aaron could sense the shift in the air. Whispers followed him when he walked home to school. Reporters were more aggressive. Now, not kind or curious, but hungry. Some even tried to bait him with questions about Evelyn's wealth, her inheritance, her choices. He answered nothing. But that didn't stop the stories. They began twisting his silence into guilt. And it only got worse when Hope came home one day, with tears in her eyes. Someone at school said, "I'm only smart because of money," she whispered, trying to hide the shake in her voice. "That the scholarship was just a favor for you." Aaron's world stopped. He knelt down, gently taking her face in his hands. "You earned every single thing, Hope, with your brain, with your heart. Don't ever let anyone make you smaller to make themselves feel bigger." She nodded, eyes watering, but the damage had been done. He realized then that the attacks weren't aimed at him, they were aimed at what he loved. That night, Evelyn showed up at his door, hands shaking, face flushed. "I should have told you," she began, and she did. She told him everything about Charles, about the folder, about the things they were saying behind closed doors, about the offers made to ease him out quietly. Aaron listened, jaw tight, fists clenched at his sides. Then he said nothing. He just turned, walked out the door, and drove. It was late, and he didn't know where he was going, just away from the cameras, the whispers, the wait. He stopped at a diner on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon lights and coffee that tastes like burnt hope. He sat alone in a booth, trying to remember who he was before all of this. A dad, a man with grease on his hands and music in his bones, someone who once fixed broken engines to keep families together. Now, he wasn't sure what he was fixing anymore. The doorbell jingled. He didn't look up, not until someone slid into the booth across from him and said softly, "You left your daughter wondering if you'd be home for dinner." "Evelyn." He looked at her, weary but not unkind. "She shouldn't have to deal with this. She shouldn't." Evelyn agreed. "But she's strong. Like you. You're not afraid of losing everything for this." "I already did once. I spent years building a version of myself that made other people comfortable. And then I met someone who reminded me who I really am." Aaron blinked. "I'm not asking you to fight them," she said. "I'm asking you to fight with me." He took a deep breath, then another. He looked at her hand on the table, open, not pushing, just waiting. "I'm scared," he admitted. "So am I," she whispered. "But I don't want to lose this." "Then don't." They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, he reached out, fingers brushing hers, and suddenly, it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about choosing each other again, and again, no matter what storm came next. Outside, the neon lights flickered on. A new day was coming.